My name is Thomas Mitchell, and at my own son's funeral, his wife looked me in the eye and told me to get out of my own house. Stop crying, pack your bags, get out. Her words were ice, a dagger to the heart twisted in the one place that was supposed to be safe. My son David was in the ground for less than 2 hours. The dirt on his casket was still fresh, and there she was, Victoria. In the home I built with my own hands, surrounded by mourners, she called me a worthless burden. What she didn't know, what she never bothered to ask, was that the house she was kicking me out of, I built it in 1987. The money she thought she inherited, $850,000, it was always mine. For 8 years she lived off my generosity while treating me like charity. And when she tried to destroy me, I didn't argue, I didn't scream, I just walked away. Because sometimes, silence is the most powerful response of all. If you're new here, hit subscribe. I share stories about standing up to disrespect. And trust me, you will not believe what happened next. What Victoria discovered just 3 days later taught both of us a lesson you can't afford to forget. Assumptions can cost you everything. Let me take you back to the beginning. The signs were there. I was just too grief-stricken to see them. When David died in that car accident 2 months ago, Victoria immediately took charge. "Don't worry about the arrangements, Tom," she'd said, her voice slick with false concern. "I'll handle everything." What she really meant was, stay out of my way. At the funeral home, she commandeered every decision. The casket, the most expensive oak model. The flowers, extravagant, tasteless arrangements. The music. When I suggested David's favorite song, the one by the Police we used to blast on the radio while we framed this very house, she cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. "That's too depressing, Tom," she declared, not even looking at me. "We need something more uplifting." I watched her, this woman in her $300 black dress, directing our family and friends like a stage manager in a tragedy. And I sat there in my old, worn gray suit, the same one I'd buried my wife Margaret in 2 years earlier, feeling like a ghost in my own life. The second sign came during the reception, back at the house, my house. Victoria pulled me aside in the kitchen, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "Tom, we need to talk about your situation." "My situation?" I asked, my voice hollow. "You're financially dependent on us now. David was supporting you, and with him gone," she shrugged, a cold, dismissive gesture. "Well, I can't carry that burden." Burden, the word hit me with the force of a physical blow. "I've been more than generous letting you stay here," she continued, her eyes scanning the kitchen I'd designed, the cabinets I'd built. "But this house is mine now. Everything is mine. David left it all to me." I just nodded, slowly, deliberately. Victoria saw that nod as surrender. What she didn't see was the calculation behind my eyes. She had no idea that David had never, ever owned this house. He lived here, yes. Grew up here, absolutely. But owned it, never. She also didn't know about the 4-drawer filing cabinet in the basement. A fortress of meticulously organized financial records going back 40 years. A CPA like me, we never throw anything away. And most importantly, she didn't know about the trust. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The funeral guests saw what Victoria wanted them to see. A successful real estate agent, gracefully steering the family through a crisis. And a broken, helpless old man, unable to manage his own affairs. They watched her shake hands, accept condolences like a queen accepting tribute. Meanwhile, I sat quietly in David's old recliner, the one I'd bought him for his 16th birthday, and listened as she painted her masterpiece of lies. "Tom's having a very hard time adjusting," I heard her tell our neighbor, Helen Davis, a woman who'd known me since the day I broke ground on this lot. "The poor man doesn't understand finances. David handled everything for him." Helen shot me a sympathetic look, but I saw the doubt in her eyes. Even she was starting to believe the fiction. That's when the cold clarity cut through my grief. People see what they expect to see. Victoria expected to see a dependent, grieving father-in-law. So that's what she saw. The old Honda Civic I drove instead of a luxury sedan. The simple, comfortable clothes I wore. My quiet, private grief. She mistook my humility for helplessness. My silence for weakness. It was a fatal mistake. As the last guest left that evening, Victoria cornered me by the front door, the scent of her expensive perfume clashing with the lingering smell of funeral flowers. "I meant what I said, Tom. This arrangement isn't working anymore." I looked past her, at the living room I'd painted 3 times over the decades, at the hardwood floors I'd installed board by board, at the crown molding I'd measured and cut with David when he was 12, teaching him the value of precision. "I understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper. But Victoria had no idea what I understood, and she definitely had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, Wednesday, I sat at my kitchen table, the one Margaret and I had refinished together, with a cup of black coffee and a yellow legal pad. I wasn't making a list of what I was losing. I was making an inventory of what Victoria thought she was gaining. The house, 2,400 square feet on Maple Street. Current market value, according to her own boasts, $420,000. The life insurance, David's policy through his engineering firm, $150,000. I could already see her mentally spending it. The contents, everything from Margaret's antique china cabinet to David's childhood drawings, priceless to me, trash to her. But the true crime wasn't the money or the property, it was the erasure. Victoria was systematically wiping away every trace of the life Margaret and I had built. She'd already boxed up my wife's photos from the mantle, David's finger paintings from the refrigerator. Even my old CPA certificates had vanished from the den wall. "I'm redecorating," she'd explained, her tone dismissive. "David always said this place needed updating." Updating, as if 40 years of love and memory were an outdated operating system. She gave me 30 days. 30 days to find a new place to live on what she assumed was my meager social security. 30 days to pack up 4 decades and simply disappear. The cruelest part was her confidence, the absolute certainty that she held all the cards. The previous afternoon, she'd handed me a printed timeline, like I was a delinquent tenant. "November 15th, she'd said, tapping a date circled in vicious red ink. "That gives you time to find a nice senior community. Something more appropriate for your situation." There was that word again, your situation. "I've already looked into a few places," she'd continued, spreading brochures across the table like a winning hand. "Sunset Manor has openings. It's only $800 a month for a studio." $800 a month. She expected me to pour my entire Social Security check into rent and somehow survive on thin air. "And food?" I'd asked. "Transportation, medical bills?" She'd shrugged. "There are programs for people in your situation, food stamps, Medicaid. The government takes care of senior citizens." The government. As if I were some charity case who'd never paid taxes, never built a business, never contributed a dime. That's when I saw the truth in its entirety. Victoria didn't just want me gone. She wanted me grateful to be leaving. She wanted me to thank her for her generosity. But Wednesday morning, with the steam from my coffee rising into the quiet kitchen, I had a different realization. Victoria had built her entire kingdom on one critical, unverified assumption, that David owned everything. She'd been married to him for 8 years, lived in this house for 8 years, and she had probably never once seen a deed, a mortgage statement, a property tax bill. Why would she? David handled the finances, or so she thought. The man takes care of the money. An old-fashioned notion, but it had worked for us. Except David had never handled my finances. He helped me with chores, sure, brought groceries, drove me to appointments after Margaret died, but the money, the investments, the property, that had always been my domain. Victoria saw David's helpfulness and assumed dependency. She saw my gratitude and assumed obligation. If I did nothing, if I packed my bags and shuffled off to Sunset Manor, what would that teach her? That bullies win. That loud, confident lies beat quiet truth. That you can steal a man's entire life if you're cruel enough. The stakes weren't just financial. They were the stakes of a life lived with purpose, now being dismantled by a vulture. But I had a weapon Victoria couldn't imagine. I just needed to find the right moment to unveil it. And that moment came sooner than she expected. Thursday morning, I was buttering my toast when I heard the front door open. No knock, no greeting, the sound of heels clicking on my hardwood floors. Victoria marched into the kitchen, a manila folder tucked under her arm like a scepter. "Tom, we need to talk about your finances." "About what?" I asked, not looking up from my toast. "About your situation," she said, sitting down without an invitation. "I need to understand exactly what David was covering for you." She opened the folder, revealing a legal pad scrawled with her aggressive handwriting. "The utilities, the property taxes, the insurance. I need the numbers so I can budget." "Budget for what?" I took a slow, deliberate bite. "For taking over those payments, obviously," she said, as if explaining basic arithmetic to a child. "Until you move out, I'll have to cover everything David was covering for you." I set my toast down. "And what exactly do you think David was covering?" "Everything, Tom. The mortgage, the taxes, the electric bill. You're on a fixed income. Social Security doesn't stretch that far." "Is that what David told you?" Her pen froze mid-scribble. "What do you mean?" "I mean, did David ever specifically tell you he was paying my bills?" "He didn't have to," she snapped, her composure cracking. "It's obvious." She gestured wildly around the room. "How else could you afford to live here? This house is worth over $400,000. "And how do you know what it's worth?" "I'm a real estate agent, Tom. I know property values." "But you've never seen the deed, have you?" The question hung in the air between us, thick and heavy. Victoria's confident mask slipped, just for a fraction of a second. "I don't need to see the deed. David inherited this house when Margaret died." "Did he?" "Of course he did. Who else would get it?" I stood up slowly, walked to the sink, and began rinsing my coffee cup. The mundane action was a deliberate contrast to her rising tension. "You know, Victoria, you've made a lot of assumptions about my finances." "They're not assumptions, they're facts." "Really?" I turned, leaning against the counter. "What other facts do you have?" She glared at her legal pad. "David told me you never contributed a dime to this house." I raised an eyebrow. "David told you that?" "Yes." "Interesting, because I built this house in 1987, paid cash for the land, hired the contractors, supervised every single day of construction." "That was 37 years ago," she spat, her voice rising. "Things change." "Some things do," I agreed calmly. "Ownership doesn't." "Look, Tom," she said, standing up, her fists clenched. "I know this is hard for you, losing David, having to face reality about your financial situation, but denial won't help." "What denial?" "The denial that you're not dependent on family charity." The word charity landed like a slap. I picked up the dish towel and dried my hands, one finger at a time. "Victoria, let me ask you something. In 8 years of marriage, did David ever show you a mortgage statement?" "We kept our finances separate." "Did he ever mention making a house payment?" "We didn't discuss every little detail." "Did you ever see him write a check for the property taxes?" Her silence was more eloquent than any confession. "Here's what I think happened," I said, my voice low and even. "David helped me around the house. He picked up groceries. He mowed the lawn. And you assumed that meant he was financially supporting me, because that's what it looked like to you. Because that's what it was, she shouted, her face flushed with anger. Appearances, I said softly, can be deceiving. Victoria snatched her papers from the table. Fine, prove it. Show me the deed. Prove you own this house. I looked her dead in the eye. I don't have to prove anything to you. Yes, you do, she screamed, the sound echoing in the quiet kitchen. Because I'm David's widow and I inherited everything. Did you? Stop answering my questions with questions. Then stop making assumptions. We stood there locked in a silent war across the linoleum. Her chest was heaving. My breath was steady. You have until November 15th, she hissed, jabbing a finger in my direction. After that, I'm changing the locks. I allowed a small, cold smile to touch my lips. We'll see about that. We'll see about what? But I didn't answer. I just turned back to the sink and started loading the dishwasher. Some conversations are better finished with lawyers present. Friday afternoon, I descended into the basement, my sanctuary, my fortress of solitude. Margaret used to joke I was a squirrel, hoarding every document like a precious nut. You never know when you'll need proof of something. Maggie, I'd tell her. The 4-drawer filing cabinet stood exactly where it had for 20 years, a monument to order in a chaotic world. I went straight for the bottom drawer, the 1980s. My fingers found the folder instantly. Real Estate 447 Maple Street. The first document, the original land purchase. March 12, 1987. Thomas Mitchell buyer, $43,000, cash. The second, the construction contract. Mitchell & Sons Building Company, $78,000, custom colonial. The third, the deed, recorded March 15, 1987. Owner Thomas Mitchell, no cosigner, no joint ownership, no mortgage. I had paid for it all, every nail, every brick, every memory. Victoria had been 4 years old then, learning to tie her shoes while I was learning to read blueprints. But this was just the prelude. The real symphony was in the folder tucked in the very back of the drawer, a folder labeled in bold black letters, Trust Documents Private. Inside was the story Victoria could never have imagined. The first page, a trust agreement dated June 15, 1985, the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. The second, a bank statement from First National Bank of Ohio, balance as of October 31st, $853,412.87. The third, a list of beneficiaries. David's name was there, yes, but not as an inheritor, as a lifetime beneficiary, with very specific, legally binding terms and conditions, terms Victoria had never, ever bothered to ask about. The trust was complex, as these things are, but the core truth was simple. Margaret and I were the original trustees. After she passed, I became the sole trustee. David received monthly allowances for his education, for housing assistance, for family support. But the ownership, the capital, always remained with the trust. It remained with me. David lived a comfortable life because I ensured it. His engineering degree, his wedding, all of it flowed from this trust. All of it was under my control. Victoria saw David's comfort and assumed independent wealth. She saw his kindness to me and assumed it was funded by his own earnings. She never dreamed the money she saw was just a river flowing back to its source. The final, devastating document was on the very bottom, David's life insurance policy, $150,000, just as she'd said. But the beneficiary wasn't Victoria Mitchell. The beneficiary was the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. The beneficiary was me. Victoria had been spending money that was never hers, making plans with resources that belonged to someone else, building a future on a foundation of sand. I closed the filing cabinet. the sound of the lock engaging a satisfying thud in the silent basement. Upstairs, I made a sandwich and considered my timeline. Victoria had given me until November 15th. Today was November 1st. I had 2 weeks. I could call her right now, show her the documents, watch her world implode. Or I could wait. I remembered the wisdom of my old business partner. Tom, the best negotiators let the other party talk themselves into a corner. Victoria was in the middle of the room, shovel in hand, digging furiously. The question was, how deep did I want to let her go? I looked around my kitchen, my cabinets, my countertops, my house, my trust, my choice. Victoria was about to learn that respect isn't negotiable. But first, she needed to finish digging her own grave. Sunday morning, I was tying my tie for church when I heard them. Victoria's voice, sharp and commanding, followed by the clatter of high heels on my porch. She'd brought her real estate agent friends for a consultation. I heard them before I saw them. "This place has incredible bones," Victoria was saying, "but the decor is so outdated. Classic old person style, you know." They swept through my front door without knocking, a flock of vultures in designer black. "Oh, Victoria, this crown molding is gorgeous," gushed a blonde woman in ridiculously high boots. "Original, 1987, Victoria replied, her voice dripping with pride. "Tom built the place, but he has no eye for modern design. Look at this wallpaper, that furniture, it's like a time capsule." I stood at the top of the stairs, a silent spectator to the desecration of my life's work. "The bones are there," another agent chimed in, "but you'll need to gut the kitchen. Those cabinets are so 80s. "Already planning on it," Victoria said brightly. "Tom will be moving to a senior community soon, so I'll have full control over the renovations." Full control over my kitchen. The one Margaret and I had spent 6 months designing, poring over blueprints at this very table. I came down the stairs. The 3 strangers stopped their appraisal, looking slightly embarrassed. "Tom," Victoria's voice was a sickly sweet falsetto. "Perfect timing. These are my colleagues from the office." She introduced me like I was a museum exhibit. "This is Tom, David's father. He's the original owner, but he's transitioning to a more suitable living situation." Transitioning, like it was a corporate merger. The blonde one gave me a pitying smile. "Mr. Mitchell, your house has such character. You must have put a lot of work into it." "Some," I said quietly. "Victoria tells us you're moving to Sunset Manor. That's such a nice facility." I turned my gaze to Victoria. "Is that what I'm doing?" Her smile tightened. "We discussed this, Tom, November 15th, remember?" "I remember you discussing it." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. "Well," the blonde agent said, "we should probably let you get to church." "Actually," Victoria cut in, her eyes glinting with malice, "Tom, while everyone's here, maybe you could tell them about the maintenance issues. The roof leak, the furnace problems." "There was no roof leak. The furnace was 2 years old." "I'm not aware of any maintenance issues," I said, my voice level. "Tom, you know the upstairs faucet drips. The basement gets damp every spring." The faucet needed a 50-cent washer. The basement had been dry for 20 years. Victoria's smile was a brittle thing. "Tom's very attached to this place. Sometimes he doesn't see the problems that are obvious to others." "Problems like what?" I asked. "Like the fact that you can't afford to maintain a house this size anymore." The room went dead silent. "Can't afford it," I repeated. "Tom, we've been through this. Your Social Security barely covers basic living expenses. And you know this how? Because I'm not blind. You drive a 15-year-old Honda. You shop with coupons. You haven't updated anything in this house since the Clinton administration." One of the agents cleared her throat. "Victoria, maybe we should." "No, it's fine," Victoria snapped, her eyes locked on me. Tom understands the situation. He's had 2 years to adjust to reality since Margaret died. What reality is that? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. That you're a 70-year-old man on a fixed income who can't handle a 2,400 square foot house anymore. 70, I said. I'm 68. Whatever the point is. The point is, I interrupted, you're making assumptions about my finances. They're not assumptions, Tom. They're observations. Observations about what? About the fact that you think I've been living off David's generosity for 2 years, and now that he's gone, I need to face reality. The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. The agents were frozen, their eyes wide. Yes, Victoria shouted, her composure shattering completely. David's generosity. You know he did. You know he paid your property taxes. He covered your utilities. He made sure you had groceries and medical care. Did he? You know he did. And I know this, I said, taking a slow step forward because I was married to HIM. I saw HIM writing the checks. What checks? My voice was a whisper, forcing her to lean in to listen, to expose her own ignorance. The checks for your expenses. Did you see him write a check to the county for property taxes? He handled those things online. Did you see him pay my electric bill? He transferred money to your account. Did you ever see a bank statement showing these transfers? We kept our FINA and CES separate, she screamed, her face a mask of fury and frustration. The blonde agent finally found her voice. Victoria, this is a family matter. We really should go. No, Victoria yelled, pointing a trembling finger at me. This needs to be said. He needs to hear it. You cannot keep living in denial about your financial situation, Tom. What denial? The denial that you're anything other than a burden. The word exploded in the room. Even Victoria seemed shocked by her own venom. The agent stared, horrified. A burden. I let the silence stretch, letting the ugly word hang there for everyone to absorb. I'm sorry, she said, though she wasn't, but yes, you're a burden. You have been since Margaret died. David was too kind to say it, but someone has to. Too kind to say what? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. That supporting you was bankrupting him. Bankrupting him. Yes, she raged, all pretense gone now. The property taxes alone are $8,000 a year. Add utilities, maintenance, your medical expenses. David spent $40,000 last year keeping you afloat, at least. And now he's gone and I'm supposed to pick up that burden. I have my own life to think about. The real estate agents were in full retreat, backing toward the door. So, I said, summarizing her entire tirade into one clean sentence, you're throwing me out. I'm giving you a month to find appropriate housing. That's more generous than most people would be. Generous, I repeated. Yes, generous, because frankly, Tom, you never contributed anything to David's success. He built his own life, earned his own money, bought his own house. This house, I asked. Yes, this house. David inherited it from Margaret, and now I inherit it from David. That's how inheritance works. I nodded slowly, a predator finally moving in for the kill. I see. Good, finally. Victoria, I said, my eyes flicking to the 3 horrified witnesses by the door. You might want to check your facts before you make statements like that in front of an audience. She let out a harsh, brittle laugh. What facts, Tom? I'm a real estate professional. I know how property ownership works. Do you? I asked. Better than the man who holds the deed. Her face went sheet white. I turned to the 3 women, their mouths agape. Ladies, I said, my tone conversational, you might want to ask Victoria to show you the deed to this house before you start planning your renovations. I let the words sink in. I let them see the panic in Victoria's eyes. Tom, don't, she began, her voice strangled. Don't what? I asked innocently. Don't tell the truth. But I had said enough. The hook was set, the trap was sprung. Enjoy your tour, I said, and I walked out the front door into the crisp morning air. I had a very important phone call to make. It was time to bring in a professional. The office of Margaret Collins, attorney at law, smelled of old leather, polished wood, and quiet power. It was a scent I found immensely comforting. Margaret, no relation to my late wife, just a happy coincidence, sat across from me, her sharp eyes scanning the contents of the 3 manila folders I'd placed on her desk. "Tom," she began, adjusting her reading glasses, "I have to ask, are you absolutely sure you want to proceed? Once we start this process, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. Victoria will know everything." "Good," I said, my voice steady. "It's time she learned the difference between assumption and fact." Margaret gave a slight, approving nod and opened the first folder. The original deed to 447 Maple Street lay on top. Thomas Mitchell, sole owner, recorded March 15, 1987. No co-signers, no joint ownership, no mortgage. You paid cash for the land and the construction. Correct. She opened the second folder. Property tax records, 37 years, all paid by Thomas Mitchell from his personal and business accounts. Correct. Homeowners insurance, utility bills, maintenance contracts, all in your name. Correct. Then she opened the third, the heaviest folder, and the crown jewel, the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. She flipped through the dense legal pages. Current balance, $853,412, as of last Friday. And David's status. Beneficiary during his lifetime. He received monthly disbursements for housing and family support. He was never a trustee, never an owner. Margaret leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Tom, this is a substantial estate. Victoria truly had no idea." "None. David was a good son, but he wasn't detail-oriented with finances. He knew the money was there when he needed it. He probably never thought to explain the intricate trust structure to her. To him, it was just Dad." So she saw the effect, a comfortable lifestyle, and assumed the cause was David's independent wealth, not your lifelong provision. "The irony is almost poetic," I said. "She tried to kick me out of my own house, using the threat of cutting off financial support that was, in fact, my own money." Margaret pulled out the life insurance document. "And this, the $150,000 policy. She's been making plans for 2 months. But the beneficiary is the trust, which means the beneficiary is me." Margaret did the math aloud. "So Victoria believes she inherited a $420,000 house and $150,000 in cash, a total of nearly $600,000, but in reality she inherited nothing. The house is yours, the insurance is yours, and she's been treating you like a charity case while planning to spend your money." She looked up at me. "Why, Tom? Why did you let this go on for 2 months? Why not correct her immediately?" I thought of the scene in my living room just hours before, the venom in Victoria's voice as she called me a burden in front of her friends. I wanted to see how far she would go. I wanted to understand the depth of her entitlement. And she went all the way to the bottom. Margaret nodded, all business again. "What are your objectives?" "4 things," I said, counting them off on my fingers. "First, I want the life insurance claim processed immediately. That money belongs to the trust. Straightforward, I'll initiate it today. Second, I want Victoria served with formal, legal notice that she is a tenant at will in my house, not an owner. She has 30 days to vacate. Poetic, the same deadline she gave you. Consider it done. Third, I want a full, documented accounting of David's relationship to the trust provided to her. No more claims of ignorance. Easily arranged. And fourth." I paused, ensuring my words were precise. "I want this delivered in front of witnesses. The same real estate agents who heard her humiliate me this morning. They should hear the truth from a source they can't dismiss. Margaret set down her pen. Tom, that moves this from a legal notification to a public spectacle. It feels like humiliation. No, I corrected gently. What she did to me was humiliation. This is accountability. There's a difference. She used social pressure to enforce her lie. I'm using it to enforce the truth. Those agents are part of the community she lied to. They deserve to know. Margaret considered this, then gave a curt nod. The legal process doesn't require it, but I understand the strategic value. When? Tomorrow morning. Give her one more night of peaceful assumptions. If she refuses to meet, we serve the papers at her office and let her figure it out in front of everyone. A flicker of respect crossed Margaret's face. She pulled out her calendar. 10 a.m. tomorrow, at her office. Exactly where her colleagues can see what happens when you mistake quiet strength for weakness. Tom, she said, closing the folders. In 30 years of practice, I've seen a lot of family disputes. This isn't really about the money or the house, is it? No, I said, standing up. It's about the principle. It's about boundaries. Victoria needs to learn that you can't treat people with cruelty just because you assume they are powerless. If she had come to me with respect and grief, we would be having a very different conversation. I would have explained everything privately and helped her find her footing. But she chose cruelty. There's a difference between grief and malice. Margaret stood and shook my hand. For what it's worth, I think David would be proud of how you're handling this. David taught me something important at the end, I said. What's that? That quiet strength always beats loud ignorance, every single time. Tuesday morning at 10:00 a.m. sharp, Margaret Collins and I walked through the glass doors of Premier Realty. The office was a symphony of muted beige and corporate art, but the air hummed with gossip and keyboard clicks. Victoria was at her desk, showing glossy property photos to a young couple. Her professional smile faltered when she saw us, then tightened into a mask of alarm. Tom, what are you doing here? We need to talk, Victoria, I said, my voice calm and level. Privately. I'm with clients, she said, her agent mode snapping into place. This can wait. Margaret Collins stepped forward, her briefcase a declaration of war. I'm Margaret Collins, attorney at law. We need to discuss urgent legal matters concerning the estate of your late husband, David Mitchell. The words attorney and legal matters had an immediate, chilling effect. The young couple exchanged uneasy glances. Maybe we should just reschedule, the husband said, already standing. No, it's fine, Victoria said, a frantic edge in her voice. Tom, just wait in the conference room. I'll be right there. Actually, Margaret interjected, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet office. I think your colleagues should hear this as well, particularly Jessica and the others who were present yesterday for the property consultation. Around the room, all pretense of work stopped, heads turned, phones were ignored. Victoria's face paled. My colleagues, Tom, what is this about? It's about the house, I said simply. We discussed the house. Her voice was tight, a wire about to snap. No, I corrected. You discussed the house, I listened. Her clients were now backing away. We'll call you, Victoria, the wife said, not even trying to hide her curiosity. Wait, Victoria called out, but they were already out the door. Jessica, the blonde agent from Sunday, approached cautiously. Victoria, is everything okay? Everything's fine, Victoria snapped, then turned her fury on me. Tom is just having difficulty accepting his new living situation. Actually, Margaret said, clicking open her briefcase with a definitive snap. Mr. Mitchell is having difficulty accepting the falsification of his old living situation. What does that mean? Jessica asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. It means, Margaret said, pulling out the first folder, we are here to correct several critical misconceptions about property ownership. There are no misconceptions. Victoria's composure was crumbling. I inherited David's house. And what house is that? Margaret asked, her tone dangerously polite. 447 Maple Street. And you have documentation of this inheritance. David's will, perhaps. Yes, his will left his personal property to me. His car, his belongings, and his house. Margaret paused, letting the silence build. Then she delivered the line that would shatter Victoria's world. David Mitchell didn't own a house. The sentence dropped into the room like a bomb. A collective, silent gasp seemed to suck the air out of the place. Victoria stared, uncomprehending. What do you mean? I mean, Margaret said, laying the original deed on Victoria's desk, 447 Maple Street is owned and has always been owned by Thomas Mitchell. Purchased March 15, 1987. No cosigners, no joint ownership, no mortgage. That's impossible. Victoria snatched the paper, her hands trembling as she read it. This has to be wrong. David inherited it when Margaret died. Margaret Mitchell owned no property separately from her husband. Everything was held in Mr. Mitchell's name and later within the trust. David lived in the house as Tom's son. He was an occupant, not an owner. I don't understand, Victoria whispered, her confidence evaporating. David paid all the bills, the taxes, the utilities. No, I said, my voice quiet but clear in the dead silence. David helped me with errands. I paid all the bills. That's not true. Margaret pulled out the second folder, a stack of papers 2 inches thick. Property tax records for 37 years, all paid by Thomas Mitchell. She fanned them out. Insurance premiums, utility bills, bank statements, all from accounts in the name of Thomas Mitchell or the trust. Victoria stared at the evidence, her mind refusing to process it. This doesn't make sense. David had money. David had a comfortable life because Tom insured it, Margaret stated. She opened the third, final folder. This is the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. Current balance, $853,412. A soft whistle came from somewhere in the office. David was a beneficiary, Margaret continued, her voice a relentless, factual drumbeat. Tom provided financial support for his education, his wedding, his life. You saw the result of that support and mistook it for David's independent wealth. The life insurance, Victoria grasped at the last straw. David's life insurance is mine. Margaret placed the final document on the desk. The beneficiary of David's life insurance policy is the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. The color drained completely from Victoria's face. She looked around the office at the faces of her colleagues, no longer curious but pitying and shocked. The woman who had been so confident, so cruel, was now exposed as a fool and a bully. Tom, she said, her voice a broken thing, I didn't know. You didn't ask, I replied. You could have asked respectfully. Margaret closed her briefcase. Victoria, based on the facts now established, you are a tenant at will in Mr. Mitchell's home. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. 30 days, but where will I go? That, Margaret said coolly, is not Mr. Mitchell's concern. You are a capable adult with a career. I'm sure you'll manage. Victoria looked at me, and for the first time I saw not anger, not contempt, but genuine, raw respect born from utter defeat. Tom, I'm sorry. I made terrible assumptions. Can we work something out? I let the question hang in the air, letting her feel the full weight of her predicament. Victoria, I said finally, respect isn't negotiable, it never was. I see that now. Do you? I asked. Good, that's the first step to earning it back. Margaret and I turned to leave. The entire office was frozen, a tableau of stunning revelation. Tom, Victoria called out, her voice desperate. What happens now? I stopped at the door and looked back at her, at the ruins of her arrogance. Now, I said, you learn what I've always known, That quiet people aren't weak. We're just selective about when we use our voices. And we left. The silence we left behind was more powerful than any scream. The ripple effects were immediate and brutal. By Thursday, my neighbor Helen Davis was at my kitchen table delivering the gossip with her morning coffee. "Tom, you've caused an earthquake." Victoria was seen shopping in the clearance aisle, and she was alone. Those real estate friends of hers, nowhere to be seen. "Maybe they're busy," I offered mildly. "Or maybe they don't want to be associated with her," Helen said shrewdly. Her broker called her in for a meeting. "My niece works there. Says 3 clients have already asked to be reassigned to other agents." "Why?" "Because," Helen said, leaning in, "if she can't figure out who owns a house she's lived in for 8 years, how can anyone trust her to handle their biggest financial transaction?" I hadn't even considered that. Her professional credibility was evaporating. My phone rang. "Margaret Collins." "Tom, developments. Victoria has retained an attorney." I wasn't surprised, and he's proposing a settlement. She wants to stay in the house for 6 months. She's offering to pay rent. "How much?" $2,000 a month. I almost laughed. Market rent was at least 3. My counteroffer is $3,500. First month last month and a security deposit up front. $10,500 to move in. If she wants to stay, she pays market rate, like any other tenant. Margaret relayed the terms. I could almost hear the sputtering on the other end of her line. Later that day, David's old college friend, Mike Thompson, showed up at my door shamefaced. "Tom, I owe you an apology. I believed Victoria. We all did. David always talked about how proud he was of you, of this house you built. I should have known better." "Assumptions are a dangerous thing, Mike." "Yeah," he said, looking at the floor. "We're all feeling pretty stupid, and we're wondering what else she lied about." On Saturday, Margaret called with the final word. "She can't afford the rent, she's moving out, and Tom, she's leaving Premier Realty, voluntarily. Let's call it a mutually agreed-upon departure." So in 1 week, Victoria had lost her home and her career. "Tom," Margaret asked, "do you feel any remorse?" I looked around my kitchen, at the cabinets Margaret had chosen, the windows that framed the oak tree we'd planted together. "Margaret," I said, "Victoria made choices. She chose cruelty over kindness, assumptions over questions, humiliation over respect. These aren't vengeful acts, they are natural consequences. I didn't get her fired. Her clients lost confidence in her judgment. I'm not making her homeless. She is facing the reality that the assets she claimed were never hers. This is accountability. It's a lesson she should have learned a long time ago." 3 weeks later, the doorbell rang. Victoria stood on my porch holding a cardboard box. She looked smaller, stripped of her aggressive confidence. "Hi, Tom," her voice was quiet. "I found some things while packing, photo albums of David, some of Margaret's recipe cards. They belong to you." I opened the door wider. "Come in." She set the box on the coffee table and looked around the living room she'd once planned to gut. "It looks the same." "Why would it change?" "I don't know. I guess I thought you might, after everything." "Some things don't need changing," I said. We sat in a silence that was no longer hostile, just quiet. "Tom," she began, her voice thick with emotion, "I owe you more than an apology." "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do. I treated you terribly. I made awful assumptions about your life, your worth. I was cruel when I should have been grateful. And now I understand what I should have seen from the start." "What's that?" "That David learned his values from someone. His kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength. He learned all of that from you." I nodded. "David was a good son." "He was, and you were a good father. I was just too blind to see it." "We all make assumptions, Victoria. The measure of a person is what they do when they learn they're wrong." "I'm trying to learn," she said. "I'm moving to Columbus, a new start." "I hope you find it." She stood to leave, then turned back. "Tom, can I ask you one thing?" "Of course." If I'd been different from the beginning, if I'd been respectful, if I'd asked questions instead of making demands, would it have been different? I thought about it. I thought about the father I was, the man David knew. "Probably," I said honestly. "I would have helped you, given you time. We could have found a way to honor David's memory together, instead of fighting over it." The truth of that hung in the air between us, the path not taken. She picked up her purse. "I guess respect really isn't negotiable, is it?" "No," I said, "it's not. Thank you for teaching me that." After she left, I opened the box. Inside were the real treasures: David's baby pictures, Margaret's handwritten recipe for apple pie, fragments of a life finally returned home. I thought about the last 3 months, the grief, the betrayal, the confrontation, the quiet victory. Victoria learned an expensive lesson about assumptions. But I learned something too. I learned that quiet strength isn't about silently accepting disrespect. It's about knowing your own power so deeply that you don't need to announce it. It's about setting boundaries that are non-negotiable. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply state the truth and let the world adjust to it. David would have been proud of that lesson. Margaret would have loved the quiet dignity of it. And me, I am at peace. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been underestimated because of your age, your quiet nature, or your simple way of life, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to stand your ground and remind someone that respect isn't given, it's earned? Remember this: sometimes the best response to disrespect isn't a loud argument. It's the quiet, undeniable power of the truth. Until next time, this is Thomas Mitchell. Remember, quiet doesn't mean weak. It just means you're smart enough to save your voice for when it truly matters.